Welcome to my YouTube channel, Secret Affairs Exposed. This is where we uncover the hidden and shocking stories of secret love affairs that were never meant to come to light.
They say weddings reveal who truly belongs and who never did. My son's wedding was supposed to be a celebration of love, unity, and family. Instead, it became the moment I realized how invisible I had become in my own bloodline. No fights, no drama, just a quiet seat in the kitchen, and a decision that would undo everything they thought they had planned. It all started with a cold smile from the bride. You see, ever since she came into my son's life, something shifted. Slowly, quietly. My calls went unanswered, my suggestions ignored, my presence tolerated at best, but still, I showed up. Because that's what mothers do. We show up. I arrived early, wearing the necklace my late husband gave me on our son's birth. I expected a welcome, a seat, maybe even a soft hug from my boy. What I got was a whisper from the wedding planner. The bride says the kitchen has the best view of the garden. You'll be sitting there. In the kitchen, among trays of half-prepared desserts and servers who looked at me with more sympathy than the family I raised. I smiled. I sat and I said nothing. But I watched everything, the laughter, the speeches, the way my son didn't meet my eyes. And in that silence, I made a decision. One that would change the day, the marriage, and the legacy they tried to erase me from. I waited until the first dance, until the champagne flutes clinked, and the photographers buzzed around like flies on sugar. Until every single guest had smiled at me with that same expression, that mix of pity and polite detachment. As if I were the ghost of a story no one wanted to hear anymore. I stood up. No announcement, no anger, just grace. I walked out of the kitchen, past the waiters, through the crowd, straight toward the planner. She blinked at me like I was a misplaced detail on her itinerary. Could you please let my son know I've left the wedding? I said it so softly, she didn't react at first. Then I turned, lifted my phone, and sent the message I'd been writing in my head since I sat in that kitchen. You invited me to your wedding, not your life. You left me behind the moment she entered it, so I'm leaving first. I walked out into the sunlight. I didn't cry, I didn't shake, I just walked. Because sometimes walking away is the loudest thing a mother can do. And sometimes the kitchen is where revolutions begin, in silence, with the smell of frosting, and a heart finally done being polite. The next morning, I woke up to 12 missed calls. 8 from my son, 2 from his new wife, 1 from my ex-sister-in-law who never liked me anyway, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize. But I could guess. Probably the wedding planner, still trying to smooth over something she couldn't fix. I didn't call back. Instead, I made myself tea, opened the curtains, and sat in the silence of a house where no one expected anything from me anymore. At 9:14 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A text from my son. Mom, can we talk, please? I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I didn't want to respond, but because I didn't know what to say. When someone places you in the kitchen on the most important day of their life, it's not about seating anymore. It's about value. I typed and deleted 5 different replies. Then finally wrote, call me when you're ready to talk to me like your mother, not an inconvenience. That was it. Short, honest, heavy. Later that evening, I got another message. This time from his wife, 4 paragraphs long, apologizing, explaining, justifying. She wrote about stress, pressure, how seating wasn't meant to offend, how she thought I'd prefer somewhere quiet, how things slipped through the cracks. But nowhere in her message was the word respect. And that's when I knew it hadn't slipped. It had landed exactly where she meant it to. The day after that, my son finally called. I answered. Not out of anger, not out of longing, but out of something heavier, the need for clarity. Mom, I'm sorry, he began, voice low, nervous. I didn't say anything. He kept talking about how things moved too fast, how he didn't realize where I was sitting, how they handled everything and he just went along with it. That was the part that broke me. He just went along with it. You're a grown man, I said finally. You stood at that altar beside the woman you chose, and you let her place me in the kitchen like a forgotten dish, and you went along with it. He didn't argue. Maybe because he couldn't? I didn't mean to hurt you, but you did. There was silence on the line. Not empty silence, the kind that builds a wall. I'm sorry, he whispered again. Don't be sorry for hurting me, I said. Be sorry for letting someone else decide where I belonged in your life. And then I hung up. Not to be dramatic, but because some conversations end themselves. 3 days passed. I didn't hear from him again. And honestly, I wasn't surprised. Sometimes silence is not absence, it's processing. And sometimes silence tells you who's willing to make the next move and who isn't. I went back to my routines. Morning tea, evening walks, quiet dinners alone. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not my friends, not my sister, not even the woman at the grocery store who always asked how the wedding plans went. Some stories don't need retelling, they just need healing. But healing isn't always soft. Sometimes healing feels like a wall going up instead of down. And mine had gone up brick by brick, built by neglect, indifference, and the cold chair I sat in that day. 1 week later, I received an envelope in the mail, don't return address, just my name, written in handwriting I recognized instantly. Inside was a wedding photo. Me, sitting in the kitchen, visible through the catering door window, blurred, forgotten. Underneath it, a note. You were never invisible to me. I was just too weak to protect you. No signature, but I knew. I sat with that photo for a long time, longer than I should have. I held it like a wound I didn't realize was still bleeding. Because acknowledgement, even in whispers, still matters. But then I noticed something else inside the envelope. A folded piece of official stationery. Langford Country Club. It was a cancellation notice. Not from me, from them, per the request of the groom and bride. The venue has been informed to void and refund all remaining post-wedding event deposits and obligations. They had canceled the honeymoon dinner, the after-party suite, even the floral bill for poster photos. I didn't know what to feel. Victory, sadness, or something in between, like justice that came too late to taste sweet. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A new message. I canceled everything, not for revenge, but because nothing beautiful should come from something so bitter. It was from my son. That's when I finally let the tears come, not for what was lost, but for what was finally seen. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the story of the kitchen incident started leaking into the family circle. Not from me. I never said a word, but people talk. They always do, especially when silence holds more weight than noise. My cousin called Ben my niece, then an old friend of my late husband, who had helped raise my son during his teenage years. Each one asked the same thing. Why didn't you say anything at the time? I always gave the same answer. Because when people show you where they think you belong, you don't argue. You accept and then decide whether to stay there. Most of them stayed quiet after that. Some whispered apologies. Others offered weak defenses like, maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But no one dared challenge what they now understood was not a mistake, it was a choice. And choices have consequences. One evening, I opened my email to find an invitation. Not to another wedding, not to a family event, but to a speaking engagement. Women who vanish, the silent strength of the overlooked matriarch. My name was printed on the banner. Bold and unapologetic. I hadn't applied. I hadn't even known it existed. My story had reached someone who saw in it something more than pain. They saw purpose. I didn't reply right away. The thought of standing in front of strangers, telling a story that still pulsed like a bruise beneath my skin, it felt raw. But then I remembered the kitchen, not just the folding chair, or the hum of the refrigerator, or the stale taste of being dismissed. I remembered what it felt like to be placed instead of invited. And I realized if I didn't speak, someone else would sit in that kitchen tomorrow. So I said yes. The day of the event, I wore the same necklace my husband had given me. The one I wore to the wedding, but this time, it didn't feel like a memory. It felt like armor. I stepped onto that stage, the lights hot, the room full. Mostly women, a few men, and all of them watching, waiting. I took a deep breath, and I told them everything. Not with bitterness, not with vengeance, but with clarity. My son's wedding taught me something. No mother ever wants to learn that love is not always louder than influence. That some people will value peace over presence. And sometimes that includes your own children. The room was silent, not in disinterest, but in recognition. When I stepped off the stage, women lined up to speak to me. Some were crying, others could barely form words. But every single one had a story. One said her daughter-in-law made her sit at the kids' table. Another said her name was left off the wedding program completely. One whispered that her son hadn't spoken to her since his engagement. And that was 4 years ago. We weren't just mothers, we were afterthoughts. In the chapters we helped write. That night, something in me shifted. Not broken, not healed, but transformed. I wasn't going to chase seats anymore. Not in kitchens, not at tables, not in anyone's life. If they wanted me there, they'd make room. And if they didn't, I'd build my own space, one where no mother ever felt like a burden. A week later, I launched something small, an online forum called The Other Chair, for mothers, grandmothers, and forgotten women who'd been sidelined in their own stories. Within days, it grew. Hundreds of posts, thousands of shares, and one message from a user that stayed with me. I didn't walk out of the kitchen that day like you did, but because you did, I might walk out of mine tomorrow. Months passed. My son didn't visit, didn't call, didn't write. And yet, not a single day passed without his face flickering through my mind as a boy, in scraped knees and soft hugs. And now, as a man who had grown without remembering who watered his roots, but then, one afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I opened it slowly. There he was, no flowers, no gifts, just him, older than I remembered, tired in the eyes. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside, no words, no questions, just space. We sat across from each other, a long silence stretched like fabric between us, woven with everything unsaid. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the kitchen." My hand stayed still in my lap. I didn't realize what I let happen. I didn't realize I was letting someone else tell me how to love you. He paused. "I'm sorry, Mom. Truly, I failed you in the moment where it mattered most." I looked at him. My son, no longer a boy, but not quite the man I thought he'd be. "Love doesn't fail in one moment," I said. "It fails in every moment where it chooses silence over presence." He nodded slowly, as if my words weighed more than he expected. "I want to make it right," he said. I tilted my head slightly. "How do you plan to do that?" "Erase a photograph, reassign a chair I was never meant to be in." He didn't flinch, for once. He didn't try to defend the indefensible. "By showing up," he said, "and not letting anyone tell me how to love my mother again." It wasn't enough, but it was a beginning. He started visiting weekly, sometimes with pastries, sometimes with nothing but silence, but always with intention. He asked questions. He listened. He didn't try to fix, just to understand, and slowly, I let the wall between us lower, brick by brick. Not because I forgot, but because I remembered what kind of man I raised. Then one day, he handed me a folded paper. It was a deed to a small event space he had rented and refurbished. "For you," he said, "to host more gatherings for women like you, like us." My breath caught. Not because of the gesture, but because for the first time, he saw me not just as his mother, but as a woman with a voice worth amplifying. The first event I hosted in that space had only 15 women. But the energy in that room, unforgettable. No stage, no microphones, just chairs in a circle. Stories passed between hands like sacred heirlooms. One woman shared how her son never even invited her to his wedding. Another said she found out her daughter was pregnant from Facebook. One whispered that her daughter-in-law called her extra baggage when she moved in to help after a surgery. There was pain, but more than that, there was power. We cried, we laughed, we remembered who we were before the world told us to shrink. And when the night ended, my son stayed behind to help clean up. He stacked chairs, took out trash, wiped down tables. He didn't say much, but as we closed the lights and locked the door, he looked at me and said, "You're helping women rewrite themselves." "No," I said, smiling softly. "They're helping themselves. I'm just making sure they have a room, not a kitchen, to do it in." A month later, I received another invitation. This time from my daughter-in-law. A formal card, embossed. My full name printed clearly on the envelope. Inside, a single line, "Dinner at our place, just you and us." No special occasion, just overdue respect. I didn't trust it, not fully, but I went. Because growth doesn't mean forgetting it. It means showing up with boundaries and grace. When I arrived, she opened the door herself. No planner, no excuses, no performance. Just a quiet woman in a home that no longer felt like a stage. Dinner was humble: spaghetti, garlic bread, lemon water in crystal glasses. My son pulled out my chair himself. This time, it wasn't in a corner. It was at the head of the table. They didn't apologize again, and I didn't bring it up. Because sometimes healing isn't a conversation. It's a chair in the right place. Finally offered without guilt. As I sat at that table, something in me shifted. Not because I was finally acknowledged, but because I had stopped needing it to feel whole. I had built something outside of their acceptance. I had spoken when it was easier to stay silent. And I had walked away from the kitchen, not with bitterness, but with purpose. Weeks later, my son called again. "Mom, can I bring the baby to your event next month?" The baby they had named Her Grace. I smiled into the phone. "Of course you can." He paused, then added, "We want her to grow up knowing what real strength looks like." And in that moment, I realized maybe I wasn't just changing chairs for the women around me. Maybe I was rearranging the entire table for the generation to come. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is sit in the seat she was never offered and turn it into a throne. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Secret Affairs Exposed for more powerful real life stories like this one.